Private banking, personal.
We're back. Welcome back to MSNBC's coverage of the funeral of Ronald Reagan. Just moments ago, he was buried in Simi Valley at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library on a hilltop that offers, obviously, as we've seen, a panoramic view of the valley and the Pacific Ocean. I'm Chris Matthews here with Pat Buchanan and Howard Fineman. You know, this service has reached its end. We're not going to see the actual burial, obviously. That's not part of the public service here, but we saw just about everything, didn't we? I mean, Nancy Reagan was transparent this week. I mean, she had no place to hide. All the emotions of a widow losing this guy. You know what struck me? When you lose somebody at an age when you don't expect to, through accident or disease, there's a shock that sort of protects you. But ironically here, when it's old age and it's slow and it's deteriorating and it finally comes, there's no shock to protect you. This is a complete, clear reality of losing this guy for Nancy Reagan. And Margaret Thatcher, look at her.
Well, she was, in a way, one of the other most important women in Ronald Reagan's life, and his staunchest ally, and the person, along with Mikhail Gorbachev and Lech Walesa, who will be remembered for ending the argument of the 20th century, which was about whether government could be the answer to our lives here on Earth. And that, to me, was the big question of the 20th century, and what Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher helped to answer, with a resounding no with the fall of the Soviet Union. History doesn't get more important than that, or bigger than that.
This former Governor Wilson, who was, of course, a great advisor to Governor Schwarzenegger, the current governor of California, as he ran for the governorship in the special election last year. We covered that one every night for weeks, that campaign.
You know, Howard is right. The great struggle of the 20th century from 1917 basically to 1989 was between the ideas as represented by the West and Ronald Reagan, the Pope, Lech Walesa, Margaret Thatcher, versus the ideas of Lenin and Stalin. And what was so interesting today, and was the other day up in the Capitol, was to see Mr. Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, stepping up and touching the coffin of the man many Americans believe is a decisive leader in winning and ending the Cold War.
That's Bo Derek, of course, the movie star. 10. It's our big movie. You know, it's interesting, you and I, Howard, cover politics in the city for a long time, and it's filled with so many people that come into office because maybe becoming a congressman is a step up in their life, and, you know, it's not a bad career. And then this guy comes along out of another field, entertainment, television, runs for governor. He doesn't waste his time with the other offices. He goes right for governor of California. Then he runs for president right away, within 2 years. Finally wins it. Comes with a purpose. Most politicians come to hold office. He came with a purpose, and I think that separates him. Pat, very much like that. You're interested in politics for a particular doctrinal reason. You believe in free enterprise, you believe in stopping communism and reducing the size of government. He didn't come in to become a senator or to become a congressman. He came to do these things.
He didn't do it for the honor of the office.
No.
He didn't do it for that, and all too
Or
many
for the salary.
All too many politicians do, and coupled with that was his unaffected nature, in which he never seemed to be regarding himself. So many politicians seem to always be looking at themselves in an invisible mirror. When I met him, he never was like that. Totally unself-conscious, but yes, committed to his values. If you read his letters, as I've been doing during this week, he's constantly in the struggle of big ideas, constantly engaging in them, and he was the capstone of a movement that Pat has been part of that took 50 years to develop, I think. It began with Bill Buckley at Yale and culminated in Ronald Reagan's election in 1980. And in a way, George W. Bush is the remainder man of that movement.
There's Mickey Rooney. He's been in the business since the 30s, guy.
This is the Hollywood part. This is the West Coast and Hollywood part. One thing we tend to forget is that Ronald Reagan is the first and only Western governor ever to be elected president. First and only Western governor. And his Westernness, the fact that though he was born in Illinois, he became the quintessential Californian.
It's Betsy Bloomingdale, Nancy Reagan's good friend, and her husband was a member of the well-known kitchen cabinet that helped finance, in fact, did finance Ronald Reagan's entry into politics in the mid-'60s in California. A lot of those kitchen cabinet members were there, or are there right now. A lot of movie stars, too. You know, there are some, let's be blunt about it, some conservative movie stars. Tom Selleck, Pat Sajak, Quizmaster, if you will, Charlie Wick, Mickey Rooney.
Yeah, but you can count them basically.
Bo Derek.
You can count them basically
Clint
on the
Eastwood
fingers
as well.
of two
You're
hands.
saying they're all there.
Most of them are there, but I encountered a wonderful exchange in the Reagan letters with Norman Lear, who is also there. Norman Lear, who founded People for the American Way, a staunch Democrat, but a friend of Reagan's till the end. They were arguing over the school prayer amendment. And Ronald Reagan finally said in the last letter, well, I guess we can agree to disagree. And for that, sitting here in the White House, I thank God. Norman, I hope that's okay with you.
Let's go back to a big moment this evening. We're out here at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. Let's go back and look at one of the moments with the former First Lady, with Nancy Reagan. Here it is. Well, that's Nancy Reagan in her last moments with her late husband. She's going to leave the gravesite. That's Michael Reagan and Patty Davis. She changed her name to Patty Davis. She wanted to be a rebel, and she was, and took her mother's name, her mother's maiden name. Well,
This is quite consciously by the Reagans, a public ceremony for the week, almost a pageant, a movie, if you will, that ends with the tight shot, just a devastatingly sad picture of Nancy Reagan looking helpless in a way that only a widow who realizes her widowhood can be. But just because these are public people doesn't mean that their grief isn't real. It's real, it's so obvious, it's palpable to everybody. And I think it's part of the way we continue on in this country, that we share our emotions with and through public people. And the Reagans were dedicatedly public people, but never uncomfortable doing it. That was the key to their success and their ability to inspire. They were never uncomfortable being in public. They were always comfortable in their own skin, whether it was off stage or on stage.
let's go right now to George Lewis, NBC's George Lewis, who covers on the West Coast on all things, and this is a big one. George Lewis, you're out there at the library.
Yes, here among the crowd of 700 invited guests at the library, and everyone was very touched by that moment when Nancy Reagan and the children spent that final second at the coffin. It was, I don't think there was a dry eye in the house. They had referred to it as Ronnie's final scene, and it was, and it all played out exactly as planned, as the sun set in the west and behind the Santa Susana Mountains. The members of the audience, the congregation, are now filing past the coffin, paying their final respects. This will take some time because of the large number of people going by very slowly. And then following that, when everyone has left, the area around the coffin will be closed, and Mr. Reagan will be laid to rest. The library will be closed tomorrow and then opened on Sunday so that the public can pay its final respects. They're expecting quite a large crowd, obviously, to show up to the library. The only thing that didn't go according to plan was that it took longer than they had expected for the funeral procession to get from Point Mugu Naval Air Station up to here. They had budgeted about 45 minutes for that, and it took much longer because an unexpected crowd of Californians showed up lining the roadway. They estimate about 150,000 people showed up. And so they slowed down the funeral procession so that people could get a good look at the hearse and Mr. Reagan's casket inside, draped with the American flag. We've talked to a lot of the people who've come by the library this week, and many of them say that they sympathized with Mr. Reagan as a person. Not all of them were on his side politically, but many of them said that they loved his warmth, they loved his positive attitude, the Morning in America of Ronald Reagan. Many people brought their children because they wanted their kids to glimpse a piece of history, to see the 40th president of the United States being laid to rest. So it's been a very somber afternoon, but also very uplifting. The weather here in California was in contrast to the weather back there in Washington. A perfect day, not a cloud in the sky, the sun setting in the west in a sort of a orange haze. A very fitting end to the day. Chris?
Let me ask you a political question, George. How does the governorship of Arnold Schwarzenegger, he is the new star of the Republican West. Howard pointed out a moment ago that Ronald Reagan was the first ever Western governor elected president. And of course, Schwarzenegger cannot be president because he's foreign born, but how does he fit into this thing of a movie star becoming a governor and becoming a star again?
Well, Ronald Reagan made the transition from the screen to politics beautifully, and all the critics said he couldn't do it. You know, that he was. They kind of dismissed him, wrote Ronald Reagan off, as many did Schwarzenegger when he made his run for governor. And Ronald Reagan's playbook seemed to be followed exactly by Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger is doing a lot of the things that Ronald Reagan did as governor, reaching out to both Democrats and Republicans, trying to bridge the gap, trying not to be too hard ideologically, actually courting his political enemies. There's a guy in the state legislature, John Burton, the leading Democrat, and Schwarzenegger has been courting him assiduously, calling him when he was traveling overseas, saying how much he missed Burton. You know, a love fest between this Republican and that Democrat. And that's exactly what Ronald Reagan did.
Let me ask you about the Hollywood community. We've been talking the last couple of days about why Ronald Reagan, who made some good movies like King's Row and was pretty well, you know, celebrated for parts like The Gipper and the Newton Rockney Story, and of course was a real success as a television performer. He was #3 in the Nielsen ratings back when there were only 3 networks, which meant that 20 million people a night were watching him on GE Theater. How come he never got a single bit of recognition from the Hollywood community, at the Oscars, at the AFI, or anything?
That's a very good question. I suspect we'll see some honorary awards being given from Hollywood to Ronald Reagan at this point. But Hollywood tends to follow, a lot of the Hollywood people tend to follow a pretty liberal Democratic line, and his politics were out of sync with a lot of Hollywood. Although it's interesting that among the invited guests here tonight were Hollywood liberals like Norman Lear, who said that they struck up a friendship with Reagan along the way and found him to be an engaging fellow, even though they disagreed with him politically.
Well, do you think